still love the fact that somebody crafted that for us. The kind, it's like we are very much. I'm very much a Streetcar Named Desire heroine. I always count on the kindness of strangers. Joining me tonight, well, joining me every week for Generation Movies, not Generation X, not Generation Y, not Generation Z, Generation Movie. FilmBuff Online's own Rich Drees. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you so much,
Greetings
JW.
Greetings and salutations, or should I say, live long and prosper. It's a good week. It's Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan week, or as I'm calling tonight's episode, brought to you by the Indie Escape Network, the Khan episode. Right? I mean, so such an important film. We'll get to it in a second. We got to get out of the preliminaries, of course. Get everybody out there. If you like what you see, by all means, check out our network. Subscribe to the Indie Escape Network YouTube channel. It's a good channel. A lot of good people on here. There's a lot of shows that are kicking around. Super cool things that are going to be happening in the next couple of months. And Rich and I are happy to be a part of it. We're happy to bring our unique brand of nerddom. It's nerddom, right? I mean, I don't look at it as a negative thing. It's not like we're biting heads off chickens, right? It's nerddom.
Not yet.
But yeah, save it for whatever show we're gonna do. But that's for YouTube, and then also Indie Escape Network Facebook page. Check them out. A lot of good people in this network. A lot of good people, good shows. Different hosts. Something for everyone. Really unique looks. Some of the guys are a little bit younger than Rich and I, and that's okay. We can try to hang with the youngins. But also, if we're talking about movies, they have to hang with us too, Rich. So, as we said at the beginning, Generation Movie, not Generation X, not Generation Y or Z, just Generation Movie. Not going to have any fights about baby boomers and weird shit here. We're just going to talk cool movies. And the movie we're going to talk about tonight is this one up in the corner, Rich. At the end of the universe lies the beginning of vengeance, right? It's up. You're doing the whole Natasha weird pointy thing. But so let's get into it because we have an hour. We're going to try to get through it. There's so much to talk about with this movie.
It is.
But let's start in general. And well, actually, we're not going to start with production. Let's just talk about this movie. Means a lot. I know it means a lot to you, and it means a lot to me. I saw this movie with my dad. My dad was a huge Star Trek fan. My grandfather was a huge Star Trek fan. And basically what happened was when this movie came out, they were fans of the motion picture, right? Star Trek the motion picture. But when this came out, this consumed them. This is what the characters were meant to be. This is what the first one should have been. This is all these things where you're watching and you're just like, that's what they saw in the 60s before you and I could consume, the original series or Next Generation or any of those things. What they saw led us to fall in love with this franchise as well. And Star Trek II is the height of the franchise.
True. Yes, I will definitely agree that Wrath of Khan is the best Star Trek film, bar none. And I don't think there's too many people who would fight either of us on that. Now,
you can have a fight. You can have a fight between different Star Treks. You can have a fight between like the Next Generation folks and the original cast, but it's getting like even the Next Generation's best movie is essentially Wrath of Khan. It's because First Contact is Wrath of Khan with Borg. Sorry.
Yeah. Now it's funny that you mentioned that. This was what they were wanting out of a Star Trek movie versus Star Trek the motion picture from 1979. About a month and a half ago, they just they re-released Star Trek the motion picture out into theaters in its brand new 4K restoration with the trims that they've been doing on it here and there. And I went and saw it with a friend of mine from high school who I had seen Star Treks 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the theaters with. And I was like, come on, Jonathan, we got to go. And, we still have 2 Star Treks to see together to collect the whole set. And
Producer's Cut's much better. Producer's Cut's way better of the motion picture, right?
I'll give you that. Yes, definitely. But I think it still is very much the other side of the coin of Star Trek. With exploring, meeting, strange new life and new civilizations, boldly going where no man has gone before, literally in terms of how that movie ends with for Decker. And so for me, it's Star Trek: The Motion Picture is a good movie in that it encompasses the cerebral side of Star Trek and what Gene Roddenberry wanted to do. Wrath of Khan is the like I said, the flip side of that coin of Star Trek.
It's the
the
visceral,
action. It's
swashbuckling.
It's a lot more centered on the characters and their interplay, and that's the stuff that Roddenberry knew he kind of had to throw in, the sci-fi thrills that he kind of had to go in there. That was the sugar to to go along with a spoonful of medicine of social critique and things like that he was doing with the show. And
yeah, it definitely has a nautical vibe. It has a swashbuckling vibe. The Star Trek: The Motion Picture is one of those, you like it if you're a Star Trek fan, but you're just kind of like, it doesn't have a through line, which is one of the main differences. Khan never doesn't have a through line. There's always some intriguing something going on with either the characters dealing with aging, the characters dealing with death, the characters dealing with moral quandaries involving my thing tonight. I did live long and prosper, but I was gonna do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, which is an interesting, the moral quandaries that are involved in this movie are really interesting. Now, when you talk about moral quandaries, you run into production on this movie. And as you know on the show, you and I discuss production, we discuss box office, critical response now and then we discuss legacy or franchise viability. Also, if you're paying attention to the show tonight, if you comment or do anything tonight, you can contact me later, either on Facebook or the Twitter or wherever, and we will try to get you in line to, at the end of the show, we're going to give away some cool, not Star Trek things, but it'll be a cool movie thing. So I'm itchy on giving away posters this week. So I got extra. They're lying around. They're not doing anything, except sitting in a box. My wife is getting itchy, so we're going to try to start giving out some stuff at the end of the show. So stick around, and as we get to the legacy of the franchise, the legacy stuff in this movie is going to blow your mind because there are things that I don't know that will absolutely
I have some interesting notes for that. Definitely.
Yes, the legacy stuff is amazing. But production starts. Production's a bit of a mess. Like it's one of those weird. They make a movie. The first movie cost a ton of money to make. 45 million, 44 million, depending on what you're looking at. It doesn't do great. It actually disappoints Paramount and a great deal for the sheer volume.
In defense of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, though, that price tag also includes all the development costs from when it originally was going to be a TV show that was going to, a new TV show that was
Star
going
Trek
to be
Phase 2
for a Paramount fourth network. Then it became a movie. Then it went back to being a TV show before it finally became Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So that's several $1 million there that just kind of get rolled into that price tag, and I think unfairly. I think it's such an unusual development process for a film to kind of saddle that movie with all of that expectation.
Also, the interesting thing is Wrath of Khan is so cheap, but it's only so cheap because they spent so much money on the motion picture. There's so much they used from the motion picture. So we got some people visiting tonight. Joe Ridgely, good to see you, Joe. Good evening, gentlemen. I look forward to Wednesday nights, except Trek nights, and he sticks his tongue out at us. Obviously, Joe has no soul. And then, that was bad. No, I'm kidding, Joe. I'm kidding. You have a soul, but if you don't like Star Trek, I don't. How? And then David Madison, JWC, my man. David Madison, my man. How are you doing? You're coming back. You're taking a whirlwind tour around the country. Everybody's very excited to have you back. He has a show on the Indie Escape Network that we're going to see on Sunday night, which is very exciting. He'll be back doing his thing the end of the night on Sundays. So very exciting that everybody's visiting us tonight. Production. Here's where it gets really interesting for me. First movie costs a ton to make, and you're right. There are provisos, prequel quos, what exactly happened. But one of the things that does happen is that Roddenberry writes the sequel, and the screenplay, the original screenplay Roddenberry turns in, widely described as a pile of trash, just bad Star Trek. And it was right around the time, Roddenberry is fighting a little bit of, like a little bit of burn from the first movie not taking off like you thought it was, right? A little bit of substance abuse here that it's always rumored that they always talk about a little bit, that it was affecting his judgment and whatever. But the original script is basically a corrupted timeline script, which again Star Trek will eventually do at some point, right? Where the crew of the Enterprise tries to prevent the assassination of, or help the assassination of Kennedy, because the Klingons ruin it by not having Kennedy assassinated. Therefore, the space program never takes off. Therefore, Federation is never completed. So Spock ends up being, in this screenplay, the man on the grassy knoll.
Yeah. And this is an idea Roddenberry, I think, was bouncing around for a while. I think at some point, he wanted to do some kind of time travel thing with, Star Trek Phase 2 / the motion picture. And I'd really love to get my hands on that script.
I bet you it's a doozy. I bet you it's just crazy.
It's a white whale of a script out there, and I choose my metaphor here very particularly for what we're talking about this evening.
Yeah, there's a lot of whale stuff going on in tonight. But basically, so Roddenberry turns in the script. It doesn't go well. He gets a booted promotion. He goes from being, writer and director and all this stuff on Star Trek. They make him an executive producer. They bring in a television producer. They bring in a guy that's worked on as a Paramount television producer for a lot of years. Harv Bennett. He's a guy that makes good, sound financial decisions and the best available movie. And when you read about some of the stuff that happened, 10 to 15 pitches from various writers, Star Trek people, coming in with different things. And eventually, from all of these conglomerated pieces, he sees maybe where we can go. And he eventually brings on another executive producer, and they've hired a director. And the director pins down from these 10 or 12 different scripts, various pieces of the scripts that he likes. And Nicholas Meyer is this young director. He directed a wonderful time travel movie called Time After Time. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible movie. Malcolm McDowell, Mary Steenburgen, David Warner. Search it out. If you've never seen it, search it out. But Nicholas Meyer comes in. He sees all these different Star Trek people coming, people who wrote on the old show, people who are just trying their hands at different things. And he takes the pieces and he takes the best chunks of some of them, including, a little known character from an episode of the show, this episode called Space Seed, right? And one of the big qualms and complaints amongst non-Star Trek fans is that Star Trek the Motion Picture didn't really have a villain. V'ger is not a villain. He just doesn't understand. They're machines that don't understand, and basically there's no real villain. But Space Seed provided the impetus of bringing back a character that was a villain, that was a major villain on the Star Trek show. And you and I were talking about this. The interesting. Well, he's a genetic Superman. So it's like he's from the eugenic wars. If you watch any Star Trek now, he is definitely somebody he's built, bred, and made to be superior. So when he gets on the Enterprise and Space Seed, all he wants to do is take over the Enterprise. Played by Ricardo Montalban in the original episode. They decide to go that route. They say, we're going to have a villain. And Nicholas Meyer gets a hold of all these different conglomerations that have various things in them. There's one called the Omega System. It's a Federation weapon. There's all eventually the Omega System and Khan become Khan and the Genesis device because they didn't want Star Trek devices to have a weapon system. The Genesis device is a terraforming system that creates new life on a planet. So basically, he takes all the pieces, Nicholas Meyer, and the rumors are, and the talk is that he hammers out a script in 12 days. He takes all the various pieces, the edges, roughs, sands them off, fixes, moves things around, comes up with a thorough plot line about a former villain returning to villainy with the utmost of vengeance on Kirk for putting that. And what I'm most amazed about the initial production, aside from how the different pieces came together so quickly and weirdly, is this thought that Roddenberry lost his touch. That's weird to me. And that Roddenberry would never...
I don't know if he ever lost his touch. I think he was always having to compromise at least a little bit on his utopian vision of the future to get the show on the air, to make the kind of
action. We need action.
Yeah, you need action. You can't explicitly state that a black woman is the fourth in command on this ship and expect your show to be carried on any station in the South. So he constantly had to make some, these little compromises here and there, which is just the process of making television anyways. And he should know that anyways from, he created and produced a TV series a few years before Star Trek called The Lieutenant. But he should have known that. And once he kind of got to the movie, he thought maybe all restrictions were kind of off, and he got a little full of his britches because Star Trek had a large growing fan base through syndicated reruns and fan conventions and things like that were starting to become a thing. So maybe he thought he had more juice and more power than Paramount was willing to concede to him. And then, as we also said, he had some other personal problems, perhaps. And that's a deadly cocktail. And that's kind of, I think, what happened, why, ultimately he has is it a creative consultant credit on the movie? Something like that, where he didn't have a whole lot of actual input. That was
executive consultant is what he and one of the things you start digging up, so Nicholas, he is a person that's never seen an episode of Star Trek. Robert Sallin and Harv Bennett are people that have never seen an episode of the original Star Trek. They're
they all sit down and they watch it all.
Yeah. Well, no. They eventually come up with a real interesting place where they are able to fix it and be able to come up with a way to find it, but they start hiring the right people. So the production goes into production. Harv Bennett, so the original production for Star Trek The Next Generation, or Star Trek Motion Picture, $44 million. The budget that Harv Bennett turns into Paramount is $8 million, that eventually gets bumped to $12.5 million. And I look at that budget, Rich, and basically they're using the budget from all these things, and they're using the budget to be able to do these things. They're using pieces from the original budget. They're using pieces from the original movie production. They're all using the production design from those movies. Yes. Joe says everyone thank Lucille Ball. Yes, Desi Liu is, but that's way earlier than the movies. But I understand where you're coming from.
Wrath of Khan is a very green movie in how it recycles, spaceship footage of the Enterprise early on in the movie. With when it's in dry dock. The regular one space station is actually the Earth dry dock control space station model, just turned upside down.
They do a lot of recycling, and that's but the idea they were able to deliver it for so cheap, $12.5 million. That means that this movie could have been successful, not being a big, but also Meyer comes up with different things. He changes the design. He makes the Enterprise, the uniforms. He makes the Enterprise itself more of a ship more of a way to look at with regards to nautical. It all becomes a nautical.
Just the look
It's
of
really inspired.
Yeah, just the look of the bridge from the motion picture, where it's spacious, it's white, it's brightly lit. It kind of feels optimistically futuristic. The bridge of the Enterprise in Wrath of Khan feels much more militaristic. It's darker lit. It feels a little tighter, a little
The red
claustrophobic.
alerts are a little bit redder. Like in the red, like there's giant alert buttons that go up and down, like everything. But the design of it is one thing. Like, Nicholas Meyer takes full control of that, and then.
But it's because this movie is basically a submarine warfare movie on one
It
level.
is. Yeah,
So
it's
he's
definitely
making that
nautical.
feel like a submarine. Those transports.
And so, from Force perspective, they do some weird, wonderful things with digital effects. The first digital effects ever put on film to do the Genesis effect, and we'll get back to that because there's a legacy company coming up at the end of the show that is just gonna blow your mind. With once you watch that trailer again, you'll never look at the idea of the Genesis project where it hits a planet. Carol Marcus is telling what's going to happen, and all the life shows up, and it's computer generated effects. You'll never look at those generated effects again without thinking about this company that wouldn't have been there without it. ILM is brought in. They bring in all these different things. They bring in all these pieces, and they find a way to do it. And one of the big things they do, they had Jerry Goldsmith, a very important composer for motion picture, but he wasn't an option for Wrath of Khan. Rosa, who we talked about last week with Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, he was also super expensive, so they didn't have him. And they wanted something John Williams-ish. They wanted something Star Wars-ish, right? They looked to a guy named James Horner. He had done music for a movie called Wolfen, which was the music was successful, not necessarily the movie. But they bring in pieces, they produce it. Green Police written by Meyer. Meyer has no idea about Star Trek, but he knows what he wants to make. He does all these different pieces, and then he starts bringing in production design and an ILM and a different effects company here or there. And then he brings in James Horner, who's never really worked on a major motion picture. Wolfen is, an outstanding movie from 1981 about werewolves in New York, not necessarily a high bound project. And Horner comes in, and this is going to be part of the legacy later. Warner's score, which basically he used synthesizers and different things for ancillary effect, basically in a time when everybody was doing traditional orchestras, right? And so he comes up with this score, and the way he does things become a standard for not only for Star Trek, but for sci-fi in general. And so it's an amazing thing how everything comes together. The creator of Star Trek, Roddenberry, is kicked upstairs. Harv Bennett, a producer, comes in from television. He hires a director that has made a couple of movies, 7% Solution, Time After Time. He hires a bunch of nobodies. James Horner is at this point a nobody, although James Horner, in our legacy portion later on, becomes one of the greatest composers in Hollywood. Scoring so many things that you can't even believe how much he scored. And then you look at it and you go, okay, well, how did the production go? Production goes great, right? They shoot it, they get it out there, they do it very fast. And it, and the through line of the movie is, it turns out Nicholas Meyer has come up with a through line. It's death, resurrection, growing old, realizing your weakness, and being able to sacrifice for your friends.
Yeah. Meyer references a Tolstoy quote that kind of sums up the whole arc of Kirk's that Kirk has in this, and it's that the biggest surprise in a man's life is old age. And when I read that, and while doing my research for this, I was like, oh yeah, because you have to remember, in an early draft of this script, before Shatner asked them to pull it out, Kirk is referenced as being 49 years old. I'm 53. So, I've
Well,
been wearing glasses all my life, but it was only recently I went to trifocals, and
yeah,
so
we're all,
so
yeah, you and I both
all
like,
that
and I,
kind of clicked into place for me, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I can suddenly realize, feel for Kirk a little bit more when he's
also,
looking over the thing and goes, damn it, and he has to put the glasses on,
yeah,
and something like,
yeah, and rewatches on this movie is incredible,
mhm.
incredible. And one of the things I think Meyer also talked about at some point, he talks about the idea of he talks about a couple of major literary, like 3 or 4 major literary books that play a big part in the storyline he wrote. So he talks about Horatio Hornblower, the idea that it's great captain fighting another great captain, right? It talks
Yeah.
about Moby Dick. Moby Dick's one of the books that's on the Botany Bay that
Mhm.
Khan has from his genetically enhanced past that is on the ship that he is shipwrecked on. It's a little bit of Sherlock Holmes too, right? Because the only time in the Arthur Conan Doyle books where Holmes is truly alive is when he is solving a case with Watson. In the same fashion that the only time Kirk is truly alive is when he is with Bones on the Enterprise,
Sure. And
gallivanting around the universe.
Nick Myers is a big Sherlock Holmes fan. Before this movie, he wrote one Sherlock Holmes pastiche novel called The 7% Solution, which went on to become a New York Times bestseller. And he's written about 4 or 5 other ones since then. I'm not even a big Sherlock Holmes fan, but I read his Sherlock Holmes book. I've read 4 out of the 5 of them. He just had a new one come out like within the last couple of years that I need
It's
to
an
track down.
right. It's an incredible thing to never see a Star Trek episode and realize that you can narrow Kirk down to he just wants to play. He just wants to go.
Mm-hmm.
Starship Adventures is what he's designed to do. And there's a moment where Spock says it like your best function is running a starship. This is what you're good at.
Yeah.
So another interesting thing before as we're talking about production, they talk about the themes of vengeance. The movie is originally called The Vengeance of Khan, but there's a little movie coming out a year from now in 1982 that kind of spoils The Vengeance of Khan, Revenge of the Jedi. They change it from Vengeance to The Wrath of Khan to stay away long before Lucas ever changes Revenge of the Jedi to Return of the Jedi. And basically, you have a production that goes really well. The production goes easy. They shoot it
Mm-hmm.
for 12.5 million. They find everything they're looking for. They hit all the themes they want. And one of the interesting things, Khan even, with Meyer looking at it, Khan even he quotes Moby Dick. His last dying gasp is Ahab's gasp from Moby Dick. Like it's amazing.
For its
Ready?
sake, I spit my
I,
last breath at thee.
I chase him around the moons of Nibia and around the entire maelstrom and round perdition's flame before I give him up.
Mm-hmm.
To the last, I grapple with thee. From hell's breath, I stab at thee. For hate's sake, I spit my last breath at thee. It's beautiful. It's something. And again, there's nothing wrong with Star Trek motion picture, but there is a through line to the Wrath of Khan that is eternal. It's death, old age, and the past that comes back to haunt you. Because one of the
It's
things, it's really one of the things that's interesting about Khan is he says it. He says it in the movie where he's basically he didn't even check on us. He
mm-hmm.
dropped us on the because basically at the end of Space is that Khan and his whole gaggle and one of the nurses on the Enterprise get put down on a planet and basically Kirk shipwrecks them there and leaves them there. And one of the reasons nobody ever checks on him again. So when he finally escapes from this, he is hell bent because his wife has died. He's hell bent on getting vengeance. But the
it's
production
grand,
goes
it's
well.
Shakespearean, it's operatic, but it's relatable. I mean, even his, Khan's number 2 is like, my lord, we've escaped. We can go anywhere. And Khan's like, nope, gotta kill Kirk. And well, that plan
You have
doesn't
a
work out.
star. That kid is so sad. Through the whole movie, it's just like we have a starship. What are we doing? We can just go. We can get him some other time. We've beaten him. Like, because the first time Khan runs into Kirk, he takes Kirk and the Enterprise apart.
Oh,
It's brutal. It's
some
brutal.
bad.
Scotty has dead engineers, including his nephew. It is a brutality session. But what happens during production goes well. 12.5 million well spent. Paramount's insanely happy. And the only thing that really goes off the tracks near the end, Horner's score is amazing. The acting is, widely regarded as some of the best. A couple things go wrong at the end with Roddenberry himself being a primary person of interest of giving away the ending. So during all this production, at the end, it's rumored that one of the people that gave away a secret is Roddenberry. One of the people that gave away a secret is James Doohan, inadvertently giving away that Spock dies in the movie. A story about him being brought before the Paramount suits who yell at him a little bit.
Don't be picking on Jimmy Doohan, okay?
Well, and that happened
He's
was
my
Nicholas
favorite
Meyer.
of the cast, and that's
Nicholas
not
Meyer,
just
one of the producers. Nicholas Meyer, said this guy just had a heart attack. Fucking relax, relax. We're lucky to have him. We're lucky to have this person that's played this character for so long. But one of the persons that's rumored to give away the secret is Roddenberry in an effort for the studio to be hated a little bit for kicking him off the movie. So it's this weird. It becomes a weird end of the production story that this somehow the secret gets out. Now Meyer hears about this, that it's gotten out, and again, this is before the internet, for all these times. Myers hears about it, and it's bubbling in the fan conventions and fan. There aren't websites, but in the magazines and stuff. So he builds the entire Kobe
fanzines.
The fans, like Starlog. Remember Starlog? I love Starlog. So good. So many good pictures. But basically, what happens is he builds an entire sequence onto the front of the movie with the Kobayashi Maru sequence to fake Spock's death, to make sure that the death at the end is a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that comes out of the production is that the only reason that he is signed on, that Nimoy is signed on, is because he ran death. So production goes well, and it gets released, and then just it begins to go crazy, right? It gets to the point where it's opening day. It has the largest opening day gross at that time in the history of film. It made $14 million in its opening weekend, which at the time is a huge amount.
Mm-hmm.
It's the largest opening week gross in history at that point in 1982 in only 1,600 theaters. So that's a nice gross. That's an impressive gross for an opening box office movie in 1982.
Yeah, that's it.
I was amazed by that. That number's incredible.
What you see today. You usually see somewhere around 32 to 3,500 theaters for a film that's going wide. So for 1,600 theaters to generate, over, the biggest opening day gross and that weekend is over the film's budget. That's pretty darn impressive.
That's an impressive opening weekend. And the other thing is, to put it in perspective, we're going to date ourselves a little bit with the episode. Maverick is on 4,600 screens. So just to give you a kind of wide-eyed experience here, in the past, theaters, there weren't as many theaters, and they certainly weren't as many big theaters. So 1,600 theaters is a huge release. 14 million opening weekend. It goes on. It has a huge gross. It goes on, Rich, to gross $78 million in the United States. Sixth highest grossing film in 1982. And it makes $97 million worldwide. And although the total gross of Wrath of Khan was less than that of the Star Trek: The Motion Picture, because of the production cost, it's a much bigger hit.
Yes,
for Paramount.
And you'll notice that it didn't make much outside of the U.S., but Star Trek has always not been a big franchise outside of the U.S. as it is, locally.
Yeah, it's not Star Trek is definitely not something that is. I mean, maybe it's becoming that as we
over time, but at this point, it certainly wasn't.
No, but 97 worldwide is a healthy gross for a sci-fi movie based on a television show from the 60s.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the critics loved it as well.
Well, and that's the next. Like, I mean, we have a method to our madness on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Critical response, then and now. I was reading
my
reception.
The art of the segue.
That was good. It was quality. It was a quality segue.
Right.
So it's positive then. It's positive now. If you look at something like Rotten Tomatoes right now, it's at 87%. That's at 68 critics. Over 68 critics, but 68 giving it a positive review. So 87%.
Maybe it's my fandom for this movie talking, but 87 feels low. It's like, okay, 87 out of 100 critics would definitely recommend seeing it.
Well,
what are these other 13
interesting. Well, it's weird. They also see the average score in the movie is 8 out of 10. So it's like, I wonder if they're thinking, like, they go, it's 87%. It's an 8 out of 10, but I didn't enjoy it or something weird. You know what I mean? I don't understand it particularly. But the interesting thing is the loop in the first film. This movie is just gangbusters from the, basically from the start. And what's going to happen is the gangbusters reaction by fans and by audiences and by critics is going to do something in our legacy section in a moment. It's basically going to, I don't want to give away the legacy section too early, but so like, but it's going to do something. So stick around. And basically, I was trying to read different reviews. I was trying to come up with different people. One of my favorite critics of the past is Pauline Kael, and all she said, a blurb about her from a review, is a wonderfully dumb film. Now, Pauline Kael is one of the hardest critics with regards to genre stuff from the 70s and 80s. And for her to call it a wonderfully dumb film is a bigger like gold star than somebody else saying it's an amazing film and I loved every minute of it. Her calling it a wonderfully dumb film is like a bad honor. Did you hit on any reviews that you were really wild about?
Well, I mean, it looks like Roger Ebert wasn't as really as enthused about it either. He kind of threw it away as, it had tepid battle sequences and just kind of complained about the melodrama of it all. There's a battle to quote him.
Ebert loved it. Ebert didn't love it, but Siskel did.
Yeah, I have this quote here from Ebert's review towards the end. There is a battle in outer space in this movie, a particularly inept one that owes more to Captain Video than to state-of-the-art special effects.
That's interesting because that sequence shot in the Mutari Nebula was actually not cutting edge, but they were super creative with how they filmed that, and they had to be because they were doing giant pieces. The Enterprise was so goddamn heavy that people moving it around on the soundstage, so it's interesting that he says it looks heavy, but I rewatching the film this past week. It wonderfully comes across.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
What kind of disappoints me with this Ebert review though is, I mean, like I said before, this is, at a point, this is a submarine warfare movie, and you have all this, this tactical idea that, Khan is only, thinking two-dimensionally, and Kirk's like, well, we can do this too, remember? We have this Z-axis we can move along. And, which is kind of interesting. And it's still very tense. It holds up really well. As I was rewatching it, I was, yeah, this has got me here. And I don't think it's just me remembering watching it as a kid. And this is me now, still engaged.
No. There is moments during that last sequence in the Mutari Nebula I feel it's tense, and the music really echoes kind of like this weird, like the echoing effect in the music that Horner does. But they just did it. They just redid it on Strange New Worlds this past week. The new Star Trek show. They just redid it. Where they did it was a black hole instead of a nebula. You know what I mean? But it was same concept of the the submarine warfare, no scanner, no way to find everything, no way to see in front of you. So I think it's really weird that Gene Siskel, though, one of his betters, right? Flat out winner, full of appealing characters and engaging relationships in a futuristic film that has a delightfully old-fashioned sense of majesty about its characters and the predicaments they get into. I think that sums it up, right? Part of this all the critics, the acting's never great, super great in a Star Trek film. The acting is never, all of these things where like the costumes aren't always that great. Some of the special effects are kind of cheap and a little bit cheap. But like one thing that comes across, Janet Maslin, right? Also New York Times, it's stronger than the first one because it's a better story. And it's basically, she says it's everything the first film should have been. So it's one of those things where one of the interesting pieces that it turns on is that it turns on this sense of we at some point knew what we should be getting. And basically, it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, you just are amazed by it and try to figure it out and go, hey, they at least tried really hard and knew exactly what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Again, Star Trek the Motion Picture is good literary science fiction because it's dealing with ideas. Star Trek The Wrath of Khan is good cinematic science fiction because it's dealing with characters and action and emotion and how those motivate your story.
Yeah, and I think again, it's the Nicholas Meyer through line, right? We're going to talk about death. We're going to talk about friends. We're going to talk about getting older, right? We're going to talk about young bucks trying to take our place in Starfleet. We're going to talk about, and I think it really ends up playing out one of those things where it's amazing, where you look at it and you go, that's, the fact that he was able to pull it out is one of the things that makes it one of the greatest sequels of all time, right? It jumps, and so it doesn't win any Academy Awards, but it does have a good thing in like it does very well in the Saturn Awards, right? Shatner actually wins Best Actor and Best Director. It was also nominated for Best Picture at the Saturn Awards in 1982, but that and Best Dramatic Presentation in the Hugo Awards in 1983, but it loses to a little movie called Blade Runner that may or may not be foreshadowing coming up in the next couple of weeks. It may be. I don't know. It's possible. It might be a movie I really like maybe love it on every level.
Everybody makes fun of Shatner's performance in most things because he certainly has a particular cadence about him. And I like
Rich,
his performance.
I don't know what you're saying.
I don't really know. But I do like his performance here. I think it's if it's not a career best, it's a career top 3. But I think even more than that, though, what Ricardo Montalban's doing is just next level. It's not quite scenery chewing, but man, he's a force. He's a force of nature,
fire,
vengeance, anger,
everything you read about him behind the scenes was he was just happy to be there and he was enjoying himself and having a blast and doing amazing stuff. And yeah, Montalban is fantastic. Everybody in the movie is actually, by Star Trek standards, way better than usual. I mean, if you look at some of the Star Trek movies, and again, it's usually the even entries, right? So you look at 2, 4, 6, right? They're the ones where you look at it and go, that's incredible. Those are good performances. But yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is one of the things that comes with critical now and then is that it not only does it succeed at the theaters where critics love it. One of the interesting things in doing research on this, actually, I can't do it as a critical thing. Hold on, we got to change. Legacy. Moving on. The most important, Rich, we're going to give us a good 15, 20 minutes on this because this is the most important aspect of the Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan for me. This movie saved the franchise. we're talking, if this movie doesn't land and land well, we don't get anything. We don't get the J.J. Abrams. We don't get Next Generation, any of the other movies, right? We don't get anything there. We don't get the viability that we might get a Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie. We don't get any of it if Star Trek 2 doesn't hit. And that is its overwhelming driving legacy is that it saved one of the most important franchises in the history of fandom. You know what I mean? Like, and I can't stress it enough that if you don't like Star Trek and you watch Star Trek 2, you really just watch Star Trek 2. I think it stands on its own, but then it might get you hooked on other Star Trek.
Yeah.
It's so good that you might want to follow these guys again.
Okay. One thing about this, though, and it kind of came out of me last week. Remember, I kind of threw out a question to you: is Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan a legacy sequel?
And I say yes. I think you hit upon something really interesting.
But this is I think what makes Star Trek 2 interesting as first of all as a sequel to Star Trek the Motion Picture, in that it's the second installment of what's now a cinematic franchise that used to be a television franchise. And it's kind of it's episodic. It's looking like this is going to become episodic, much like the James Bond franchise. But outside of in the Bond franchise where they mention Tracy's death at the end of on Her Majesty's Secret Service only like once or twice up until this point.
Yeah.
And something like the Planet of the Apes, which sort of feels like a continual saga that calls back on previous entries, or like something like the Andy Hardy films, like early on they would mention something that happened in the previous film. This is the start, really. Outside of those couple of examples, this is the start of where franchises stop being so episodic and start growing out of their own mythology and exploring that and expecting the audience to remember some of the bigger swaths of their mythology. Because Star Trek 2 leads to 3 and 4, which all work as a triptych together. And ultimately, Star Trek, and this is a complaint I've had about Star Trek, Star Trek used to be about, different ideas and exploring things and exploring ideas and commenting on social issues and things like that. But at some point, Star Trek became about Star Trek. It wasn't that, the Borg can be seen as an allegory to this. It's, we got to fight the Borg, so we have to go learn more about the Borg, so there's more lore about the Borg and for the fans to enjoy. And, and not just Star Trek, but there are other franchises that have, to some extent or another, kind of crawled up their own butts about it. And,
I would agree.
This is kind of like ground zero for that. I'm not saying Star Trek 2 Wrath of Khan is bad for what it does and for what
it is. It is the place where legacy sequels and where the little like, do you remember in Star Trek 2? Oh, well, yeah, Spock's body ended up on this planet, and what was Genesis effect? So maybe he can come back, and
yeah.
And then the next one ties into it. That's a great one. I think
this is ground zero.
One of the interesting things that came out of this, and so Wrath of Khan, my dad had a Betamax, okay? My dad had a Betamax and a VHS machine, and basically what had happened, what I will tell you is, with this Betamax and this machine, he in 1982 bought Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan on VHS or Beta for $39.95. Now, you say that's expensive, Rich. You say that's a lot of money, Rich. You say that's a lot of money, Rich. Yeah, you say it's a lot of money, but at that point, video cassettes were $79.95. So this is before Walmart, before Kmart, before any time when you go in and buy a $19.95 or a $9.95 cassette or Blu-ray or whatever. Movies cost $70, $80. Star Trek was the first one that sold for $39.95.
Yeah,
And when it
that's
sold for
basically
30,
the first movie that became like retail sell-through with the
yes, it completely changed the retail business, the retail VHS and Betamax. It caused everything to get cheaper, and everybody was able to get one. It sold at the time a record 120,000 copies. So it's a drop in the bucket for what's streaming today. But it completely changed the market. It completely changed the
Mhm.
market. Oh, Timothy checking in. Timothy is one of the I believe he's going to be one of the brand new hosts of a cool concept show coming up that I hope to be a part of. Unfortunately, I just got off work and tuning in. Did you mention it was based off of season 1, episode 22? You mean Space Seed, Timothy? Of course we mentioned that. We were just talking about that. We were talking about the idea that it's a sequel in name to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, but as Rich pointed out, it is the first legacy sequel of all time because it is a legacy sequel, not necessarily to a film, but to an episode of Star Trek called Space Seed that had Ricardo Montalban. Of course, we mentioned that. Thank you for bringing it up. Good to see you.
and
I hope you're well.
and at the risk of having to be really nerdy and push my glasses up like this as I say this, it was a second season episode, not a first season episode.
Oh, Timothy, he took you out. He took you out back to the
Sorry, my
nerd
friend.
woodshed. Now, one of the most and you didn't bring this up, so I'm going to bring it up. I think this is one of the greatest legacy things going for Star Trek 2, right? So it saves a franchise. It causes a fandom worldwide to find itself again. It makes a trilogy out of the 3 movies that come. The most interesting thing is this little Lucasfilm computer graphics group. They come in at some point and they do a whole thing where it may not be Lucasfilm. I'm going to take that back. But there's a computer graphics company that comes in and does the Genesis effect. It's a video, plays in the middle of the movie. It's Timothy says, ouch. Timothy, he you should see him in rehearsals for the show. He's brutal. All razor elbows. So this company comes in and creates an effect that basically the Genesis effect. It's the sequence in the movie where you watch the Genesis device introduced to a planet. It sweeps over the planet like a hot kind of like coals kind of thing, and then eventually the computer graphics develop into lakes and rivers and mountains, and then they can put life on that planet. Now, Rich, the interesting thing here is that computer graphics company, they knocked it out of the park. It's the first time a computer graphics thing was ever used in a film. Where it's really impressive is that computer graphics company becomes this other company at some point called Pixar.
Whatever happened to them?
They're making movies for this streamer, and they're making franchises. They've been making these movies since like '95. It's weird. They're a tiny company. A bunch of artists, really struggling artists. But so Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, the company that did the visual effects, that did the Genesis sequence, becomes Pixar, which is, if you don't think that's some legacy, that's one of the most incredible legacy movie ever. You look up and you go, what? Because Pixar,
it's
so
about
Star
as
Trek
groundbreaking as Lucas founding ILM to do Star Wars.
Yeah, it's really an incredible kind of like find when you look up and you go, my God, you mean Pixar, Star Trek? So if you have a friend or family member or anybody says, I hate Star Trek, if they hate Star Trek, they also hate Pixar. I'm just saying, it may not be right. I'm just telling you what it is.
It's fair.
And the last, do you have anything else legacy you want to go over?
No, that was pretty much what I had.
Okay. I think one of the and this is one of my last things I'm going to talk about. I I think we had, for the most part, in films and movies, you had deaths and you had characters that died and you had all these different things. Spock is the first pop culture event death. It is the first death that you look at and you go, what? How? When? Why? Where? Right? And I'm not saying there aren't deaths in movies, but if you say Sonny Corleone, who's a mobster, is going to die, it's not nearly as impactful as one of the three main characters in a franchise, right? And what I would say to you is, I think the interesting door that this movie opened was twofold. One's a problem and one's not. But the twofold issue problem of killing main characters and the issue of also bringing them back, a la comic books,
Mm.
a la some major, science fiction movies and different things. But
Well,
like, killing main characters, this is one of the big pop culture deaths. This
yeah,
death
I
was
would
talked
say.
about and
Mhm.
impacted people. But like,
I would say going back to Nick Meyer's love of Sherlock Holmes, um, I would say the first real pop culture character to get offed that shocked, the public was Sherlock Holmes when, Arthur Conan Doyle had him take the tumble off of Reichenbach Falls with Professor Moriarty because he was just tired of writing them. And, I think, Nimoy felt the same way about playing Spock at the time, so he asked to be killed off at the end of this movie. And
in
you
grand
know,
fashion, I asked to
yeah,
be killed off in grand fashion. Should
and
be
Nick
big.
Meyer, was already seeing the parallels between like Spock and Sherlock Holmes and the way that they think logically and make deductions based on that, and they suppress their emotions. And so, yeah, I could see why he was interested in doing this and how it works. And, and of course, much like Arthur Conan Doyle, they almost immediately reversed that death, as you were saying.
Well, you gotta make money. I'm not, but I think that's an interesting thing. That is one of the worst things it comes out of. But it's also it's also one of the first movies that deals with no win scenarios. The idea that your heroes might not win.
Mm-hmm.
It was touched upon a little bit in Empire the year before, but this is a different time where your heroes aren't necessarily always going to win. And I think like one of the things that touched me during as I'm watching it is the subject of death is kind of joked about for a good hour of the movie until Khan shows up, right? But they're joking about it. The Kobayashi Maru is played off as a joke, like the idea that you don't learn about how Kirk beat it, but you learn that he did beat it, that he didn't like the parameters, he doesn't like a no-win situation, he doesn't believe in it, and then the no-win situation is placed in front of him. And I think for a lot of our pop culture and a lot of our stories, we have, whether you're a Buffy fan or a Marvel fan or a Star Wars fan, the idea of sacrifice for the greater good, the idea of sacrifice from a major character that you don't want to go, that is used time and time again. Snapping the finger, right? I am Iron Man, right?
Mm-hmm.
It all dates back to this death. It all goes back to this death.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right about like pop culture deaths in books and different movies and stuff. But this is the death that I think opened the door for people to die on screen. And you see like Ripley dying, you see different people dying on screen that you don't necessarily think are going to die. Ripley's brought back in Alien Resurrection, right? So it becomes this giant kind of like sci-fi death loop where but it's an interesting thing that this was the movie that it first kind of struck its head. I'm always perplexed by that, how much it's used, how much the trope is used, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily to the same effect as Star Trek 2.
Yeah. Um, and this is also interesting because it deconstructs Kirk's character in a way, because like we said, he's always not believed in the no-win scenario. He's always had an ace up his sleeve. You know, talking on an open channel during, during a battle, use code. Days would seem like hours would seem like days. Kirk always managed to weasel his way out of any problem he ever got himself into in the original series. And then his luck runs out. And I think that's such an interesting way to deconstruct Kirk as a character and almost as a story device of, that goes through these stories, and to see what happens when that doesn't work right anymore. And that's, I think, what that last few moments of the movie, I think, are the best, when Kirk becomes reflective about losing his friend. And maybe I'm thinking about this because this is the first time I've watched this since a very good friend of mine from high school passed away 2 years ago. Later this month is on the anniversary of his passing. And there's been a couple things I've watched over this time, that have kind of dealt with losing a friend, grief, passing of someone who's close to you, that I've watched, and it's really just kind of kicked me in the heart a little bit. Whether it's the moment, the end of Return of the King, when Bilbo and Frodo are in the Grey Havens and they depart for the lands in the West, or here, where Kirk, gives his eulogy to Spock, and then later
with the bagpipes.
Yeah, and then later where they're on the bridge, and all of that, it resonates with me now in a way that didn't before.
I was crying like a fucking baby. I was crying like a baby, Rich.
I wish it wouldn't have to resonate with me, because I wish my friend was here, but that's not the case. And it's a weird things like this that can help us process these emotions. That
right.
Even
watching your favorite characters, watching your favorite character suffer in a way you might be suffering is one of the most cathartic experiences. I cried like a baby, Rich, yesterday watching this movie. I was watching my nephews. I was watching this movie. I was crying like a goddamn baby, and they're looking at me like, why I was so sad. They had no idea why I was so sad. I'm like, well, you're Spock, just like a baby. It was ridiculous. But that's one of the great things about the movie. My favorite moments are like when he's in the radioactive chamber and he's like, ship out of danger. Like, I knew it would work. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, of course it would work. But that's the magic of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. It is an incredible franchise movie. It is an incredible. It's in the conversation with the best sequels ever made. We've discovered tonight that it's a legacy sequel, right, to a TV show, not necessarily a movie, which is a great thing to call upon. And what I want to say,
it's the best Star Trek movie. It's one of the best genre movies, science fiction genre movies. If you're having,
and it's one of the best movies of '82. 40th anniversary of this movie. It's 40 years old, and it still reverberates as like with everything. Khan, it has one of the best villains. It has one of the best through-line stories. It has one of the best, storylines where you're talking about your character going through pain, going through suffering. It is an incredible testament to the people like Nicholas Meyer, Bennett, who found a way to make this movie and do it do greatness, right? Can't talk about it enough. It's a great thing. What I am going to say, a couple things. So if you stuck around with us all the way through Legacy and you found out that Pixar was put on Earth by a Star Trek movie, and you found out that, it's really a legacy sequel to a TV show, which is, we not but kind of the first of its kind. What I'm going to go to YouTube, or you go to the Facebook Indie Escape Network. What Rich and I are going to do, I'm itching to give away posters. So the first 7 people that comment on our show on the Indie Escape Network, either on YouTube or on Facebook, I will message you, and then we will get together addresses, and I will ship out some posters to you. Some nice, something nice. So we're gonna say let's say the first 5.
And I want to throw out a recommendation too. If you haven't watched Star Trek in a while, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan in a while, and you're thinking, you know what, I want to go back and rewatch this now. Hold off until the end of the summer. September 4th, that Sunday,
Yes.
Fathom Events is having it back in the theaters, and there's really no better way to see this than on a big giant screen.
With a lot of people, yeah,
a lot of friends, a lot of fans, and it's a guaranteed great time.
So wait, this gets better. Hold on. Joe Ridgely wrote, "I was today this year when I found comics again from Fantasy Island. Facepalm. I'm not gonna hold back the facepalm. You might have a double. That might be a double facepalm.
Oh, Joe.
Yes, Joe is so he's so fun in his fandom. Okay, doesn't like Star Trek 2. Also doesn't like Star Trek, but also doesn't like Khan is Mr. Rourke. Okay, we got to talk, Joe. We're gonna have some beers and talk about this. Where can people find your stuff? Where can they indulge of Rich Drees?
My ramblings can be found at FilmBuffOnline.com. I also co-host a podcast through FilmBuff with my very good friend and contributing editor to the site, Natasha Bogutsky. That's called the Big Picture Podcast. You can find that at bigpicturepod.com, which actually just redirects you back to FilmBuff Online for all those episodes. Our most recent episode.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. Yes.
It gets you back.
Our most recent episode looked at the new Downton Abbey movie.
Oh, nice, excellent. That's great. People can find me at PA Movie Guy on Twitter and on Instagram at JDubsRaider. They can also find me at the Florida Movie Guy on Facebook. Also, I do a little podcast at 8:00 Wednesday nights called Loud and Nerdy with Paul Spratt and on regular occasion, Rich Drees, the man to my right. The man to my right. I don't know. It'd be left. Yeah. Man to my left, but it's actually right. If you're looking. It's a good show. We do pop culture, all kinds of fun stuff. I want to thank everybody at the Indie Escape Network for having us on. We love doing this show.
You guys.
We're having a blast. And so we always tease, again, first 5 commenters either on YouTube or on the Indie Escape Network page on Facebook will get something from the show. And then what I would also say is, I don't know, I like to do a tease. I'm a big tease. I'm going to tell you, it's in my top 5 all time. We're doing next week. Ready?
Ooh. Yes. This is one movie I actually had a discussion about. Was part of the core curriculum of one of my college courses, and we can get into that next week.
It is Barn. I can't talk about it enough. I enjoy it on so many visceral levels. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about The Thing, 1982, John Carpenter masterpiece that has transcended time. We'll see everybody next week. Oh, wait, we got more comments before we go. No, we don't. Well, we have Joe chiming in with, I like Chris Pine Star Trek movies. Okay. Oh, they're okay. They're okay, but you realize one of the Chris Pine Star Trek movies is just a tired retread of Star Trek 2, right? It's just not good.
Do you remember we sat next to each other when that came out? Star Trek Into Darkness came out, and as the lights were going down, I literally was sitting there going, "Please don't suck! Please don't suck! Please don't suck!" And
I think I was with you going, "Please don't suck! Please don't suck!" Also, I was going with you. I don't want him to be Khan. I know we had the discussion before the lights went down, where I was just sitting there going, "I just don't want him to be Khan. It's okay if he's not Khan. It's okay. It's okay that Benedict Cumberbatch is not Khan. They can come up with something original."
I think Into Darkness just kind of traded on the fact that we had such goodwill about Wrath of Khan to fill in storytelling and character gaps in its own movie, thinking, well, it's they already know this story kind of anyway, so why bother doing anything? And it felt
which
like
is
really
another whole discussion, because the first Star Trek movie from Abrams is great, is a lot of fun, and it's fun, and they didn't have to go that route. But that's time for another story. Next week, The Thing, 1982, a remake that in every conceivable way is better than its predecessor. That's a big thing because it was a Howard Hawks movie. That's a big.
Yeah, come on.
That's big. I don't know. I love it better. Anyway, thanks for joining us. Have a great night. Indie Escape Network. 5 comments. First 5 commenters either on the YouTube or on the Indie Escape, joining the Indie Escape and making a comment about the episode. Something cool in the mail from me.
Have a great week, everybody.
Have a great weekend. Stay safe.